Today I'm going to present about Twig recipes, making Drupal 8 render the markup that you want. The slides are available in that URL, so no need to copy if you don't want to. And I will also tweet about it later, so you can get them. My name is Mauricio Dinarte. You can find me as Dinarcon in Twitter and pretty much everywhere in the internet. My email and my profile in Drupal.org. I am from Nicaragua, so we have a lot of volcanoes, we have beautiful lakes, and we have a lake with an island. In that island, two volcanoes, one of them is active, so if you want to do some extreme adventures, you can go there. Um, I work for Agaric, a US-based company. Actually, we're based here in Boston, and we have offices in Germany and Nicaragua. And I usually do this at the end, but this is the first time that I present this particular session, so I would like to know your feedback. Like really a lot. If the font size, if the colors, if the examples, if the order in which things are explained doesn't make sense, please let me know. The speakers love feedback, and this is the first time that I do this one. I would love to hear from you. Um, so, we're talking about Drupal 8 markup using Twig. We want to render stuff. The first thing that we need to cover is themes in Drupal. So what are themes? Themes is in Drupal what controls the appearance of my website. And what does that entails? A theme defines the layout. So if you have 3 columns, 4 columns, 1 column, or even like the responsive behavior of the website, that is provided by the theme. It also sets the color scheme of your website, the fonts to be used, both in font size, styles, and so on. And they might provide interactive user experiences, for example, like a slideshow and so on. Usually, there is like a gray line between what is supposed to be done by themes and what is supposed to be done with modules. An example of that is a slideshow. Both can be provided by the slideshow can be provided either by a theme or by a module. So depending on what theme you use, you can have this interactive user experience or not, but in any case, a theme can provide it if needed. You can find more information about D8 theming in general at that URL, and the one below, it's like a distilled guide, really, really good, highly recommended. How does a theme can do all of this stuff? In the end, we're talking about the web, and the web is reading HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and also we have assets, for example, the images. So the theme is going to be responsible for creating this stuff. Now, how does the theme create that stuff? Using templates. So a template are used to separate the presentation logic from the business logic. What does this mean? In theory, you can, in your template, in the same, before in Drupal 7, for example, it was possible to have into template queries to the database. But that you are not supposed to do those things in templates. Templates is only for rendering HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You are not supposed to be querying the database from a template. So the main purpose of this is to separate the logic, the business logic from the presentation logic. And in the template, you are only supposed to, writing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and printing variables that will come from your, backend. Yeah, that. So we're going to see how templates work in Drupal, but another thing that is important to understand is when we want to modify the Drupal markup, we need to know what we're dealing with. Usually, like even a single piece of information can be many layers of abstraction. For example, we can have, let's say, the username. Okay, the username, but what about that? The username is a field. Probably it's a field within a node. Probably that was a listing created with a view. The view created a blog, and the blog was created in a theme region. So even though we're just seeing one string, one username, it is 5 different stuff, one on top of the other. They are stacked one on top of the other. And for that specific example, there would be at least 5 templates, being responsible to render that markup. So we need to understand how things relate to each other. And if you allow the commercial, yesterday I gave a presentation about these things, like how these different layers interact with each other, and there are recordings available from previous camps, so you might want to have a look at that to understand how all of these work together. That being said, and going back to templates, Drupal has a lot of templates. So as I said before, even if you're trying to print one line, many templates can be involved in that process. So there is an outer template called the HTML template, then the inner one for page, and we're going to see example of this. And then one for region, so everything that you see in a theme in Drupal 8 is inside a region. So you will have the HTML template, the page template, and these boxes are regions. So there you can place content. And you can, for example, in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But every theme can define as many or as little regions as the theme wants. The point is that you will have a template per region. Inside that region, you will have a template per block. And inside each block, you will have more templates for other stuff. As you can imagine, this can become unwieldy very easily. So you need to know what you're working with in order to be able to modify it. An example of a template, this is the HTML template from Drupal 8. One thing to know, this is Drupal 8 specific. We require the templates to be you have the theme folder. Within the theme folder, you have a templates folder, and then you place the templates there. You can have, for organization purposes, subdirectories if you want it, but it is not required. In the right location, so your theme/templates, you need to name them something.html.twig. This is the HTML template. That's why it is repeated twice. But in the next example, this is the page template. So it is page.html.twig. The point is that it has to end with html.twig. And as you can see, this is like the outer wrapper of Drupal. This is like the outer template, if you will. So we define the dog type, the HTML, the head, the body, and so on. And as you can see, this is HTML, and we're just printing CSS as we would normally do. Well, this is a little bit special, but bear with me. You can use link tags or JavaScript or script tags here as you will do in any static web page. And we have curly braces to print dynamic content or variables. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But this is like, you can take literally an HTML page, an static HTML page, and just replace the dynamic part with variables, and that will be a template. So it is not complicated at all. So now, okay, this is the HTML template. Then we have the page template. In the page template, we have a variable called page. And that variable called page has all the regions of the template. So, for example, here, I am rendering the header region. Page.header means render the header region. Page.help, render the help region. Page.content, print the content region, and so on. So we have a reference from one template to the next. So this is like the second level, the page template. Then we have the region template. In the region template, it's really like simple. We just, if there is content, we print the content. We have the region there. Inside regions, we have blocks. So the next one is the block template. And again, we have some markup, and we print the content. Let's say that the content of this block is a node. Then we have the node template. And we can continue doing this like all the way to the field level. For views in particular, for example, we have many templates happening at the same time. One single view can be the result of at least 4 layers of templates, just the view, without taking into account the other things like the block, the region, the page, like just the view. So that is why you need to understand also the hierarchy, how things relate to each other, and like the hierarchy to know what I am supposed to modify in order to get the markup that I want. A little bit about Twig. So Twig is the templating engine used now in Drupal 8. Before we used one called PHP template, where you could write PHP, and because you could write PHP, you can do nasty stuff like wiping out your database and losing all your information. So somewhat for security reasons and for sanity's sake, we now have Twig in core. Twig is actually um, the syntax that it uses is very similar to Jinja and other templating engines using other programming languages. So for someone from other communities, let's say someone using Django or Rails, they can see this and they can understand it. This is nothing specific to Drupal. So that is a benefit because we can have more developers getting involved. But for us that we're working in Drupal already, so we're using Twig. It was developed by the same people who developed Symfony, which was also integrated into Drupal 8. And you can find more information about Twig there. And this is a Twig template. As you can see, it is really simple. It is like what I said before. You can have a HTML page, a static page, and just replace the dynamic part with curly braces and some things that we're going to cover next. So this is the dynamic part here. This is the dynamic part there. More information in that link. Now, some very basic concepts about Twig that will be useful when we go directly to the recipes. Let's say we have a variable called foo. We can access properties inside that variable, like using that dot notation. This is called a dot notation. So foo.bar will look something called bar within something called foo. For those that use Drupal 7 and did templating in Drupal 7, sometimes we had objects, sometimes we had arrays, sometimes we just have scalar values, and we had to accommodate for that in the template. And that is something that the themer doesn't need to know. Like the themer just wants to print a dynamic part. They don't have to know the underlying data structure. So with Twig, this is solved because using the dot notation, it will figure it out. If it is an object, it will figure out that I am trying to print a property of that object. If it is an array, it will understand that I'm trying to print a key within that array, and so on. If it is just a single variable, a scalar value, it will just print the variable. So Twig abstract that from us, and that is good because as a front-end developer, I don't need to know what the backend or the data structure is like. In addition to the dot notation, we have two more options. One is like using square brackets. And this is most useful in Drupal when we have render arrays. So when we have render arrays, we have a hash key. Some of the keys start with a hash. You cannot use a hash with a dot notation. If you put foo dot hash bar, that will not work. So in those cases, you can use foo, the square brackets, and in a string, hash something, hash titles, hash something. Another option is to use the attribute function. So you use the attribute function, you put the name, and you put the attribute that you want to print. So you can say hash title or hash value or something like that. All of these things can be used interchangeably. But usually we use the first one because it's the most intuitive and the less verbose one. We also, in addition to the variables that are provided, and when I say that are provided are things that the backend give us, we can also define our own variables. So the way to do that, we say set, the name of the variable equals, and then the value. It can be a string, an array, an object, and so on. We define that, whatever we want. We also have filters, and this is where like Twig start to become really useful and really powerful. So let's say we have a name variable that contains some user enter input. Maybe it has HTML inside. So we can strip the tags from that and just have the content. And then we can process that to, let's say, to be like a title. So every letter will be capitalized. So how do I do that? Using filters. So filters require a variable name, then you use a pipe, and then the name of the filter. And you will get something out of it. Filters can be stacked one on top of the next. So I am applying the strip tag filters to the name variable. And to the result of that, I am applying the title filter. Some filters receive parameters. For example, if we have an array, and we want to concatenate the array using a comma in the middle of each element, we can use the join filter, and then we pass the separator. If in this case it's comma space, but we can put there anything we want. These examples are taken directly from the Twig documentation. There are some security things that I'm not going to cover here unless we want in later. But in Drupal we have something called safe join. So in Drupal you will use safe join instead of join because of some security implications there. But the concept is exactly the same. You have a list, you use pipe, you use safe join, and then you have a separator. That's the only difference is the name of the filter itself. Uh, the filters, you can use the pipe notation, or you can use this syntax. You can have a square, yeah, a square, no, that's not, yeah, thank you, a curly bracket, and a percent sign, then the word filter, and then the name of the filter. And you put anything that you want to use that filter, and you end with this end filter. So this would be equivalent to saying, like, if we don't have this line and this line, this text become uppercase, pipe, upper. So that is equivalent. You can do either or the other one or the other one. In addition to filters, we also have functions. The function here is the one that says range. So if I have range 0, 3, that will produce 0, 1, 2, 3. What is the difference between a filter and a function? The filter requires me to give something first. Like if you see here, I need to have a variable, and on that variable I will apply the filter. For a function, I don't have that. I don't have anything before this. I don't have a variable preceding my function. I just have the function name, and if the function expects a parameter, I just pass the parameters. That's it. In addition to functions, we also have tests. For example, if let's say this name was an array, a number, and then is this number odd, is this number even, or we can use if a variable is equal to something else, if a variable is not equal to something else. What is the difference between a test and a function and a filter? Both filters and functions return a value. It can be a string, it can be a number, it can be an array, it can be something. A test just returns true or false. It's a Boolean output of that. So that is the difference. And it is mostly useful for if statements, but it has other uses too. The key thing to remember is the test return either true or false. They cannot return anything else. Yeah, it will print true or false. And actually, if it is false, it won't print anything. But that's why I say this is usually used within if statements. So if the statement is evaluated to true, then I do something else. We also have control structures. Two of them are the for and the if. So for user in users, this is an array. And for each element in the array, I will look for it will be assigned to a user variable, and inside here I can have, like, this is an object, user.username, and I'm using the if filter, which is used to escape the markup. We also have the if, so this is like a test. If the user length, imagine that this is an array. If the number of elements within that array is greater than 0, then do something else. One thing to note about Twig is that it tries to abstract as many concepts as possible. For example, if the variable user were an array, in PHP we'll have to use the count function. If it were a string, we will use the length function. In Twig, it is one single function to determine the same thing. So it abstracts that, is it an array, is it a string, is it something else? No. With Twig, it tries to be as abstract as possible. So it will work the same, and it will produce the result that we would expect, no matter what the variable type is. So that is also a benefit of using Twig. Okay. Twig is great, and the documentation is very good, so I will encourage you to go to the official website. It is like an hour or two reading, so it's worth doing it. Now we're going to switch to how to overwrite the Drupal markup. We now know that we use templates to render something and that we need Twig to print those things. Now, how to do it? Remember that I said that we have many layers of templates? Well, in addition to having many layers, we have a lot. The number of templates will vary depending on the theme that you're using. And you can have a base theme, and that has to do a little bit with theming. There are some good resources that I could point to, but the thing that I want to go with this image is that the stable core theme has 146 templates. Let's imagine that you have to deal with 146 templates, and you only want to change the username. Why do I have to deal with that many options? So, because there are so many options, I need to have some way to find the right template to modify. Like I need to modify the node template or the user template or the list template. So each of them have a name. I need to know exactly which one I have to modify. So we have some options. If you follow that link, you will have information about how to enable the theme debug functionality from Drupal 8. Basically, you have a services.yaml file in your Drupal installation within sites default folder. You need to find these keys and change them. Debug is false by default. You change it to true. Auto reload is null by default. You change it to true, and cache you have it through. When you do that and clear the cache, you have to clear the cache, then you will get this. When you inspect the source of your web page, in addition to having the markup, you will have comments, and that comment will give you very useful information about the template that is being used to render that specific part. Like this comment, like this is one, but you will have as many templates as they were used in your to render that page. So what do we see here? We see what theme hook was used. So if, let's say, we're going to see an example of this later, but if I wanted to provide a new variable for this template, I would have to implement a hook preprocess function. But the hook preprocess function has many variations. Which one is the one that I need to use? Node. So it says theme hook node, so I would implement hook preprocess node. And that I will be certain that that is the place where I have to put my logic to provide a new variable to the Twig template. In addition to that, we get a list of theme suggestions. So how does Drupal determine what is the template that is going to be used? It looks for this list. The one with an X is the one being used here. If any of these files existed, it will use that file to render that specific page or piece of content. So let's say that this is a node, and I want to override. Let's say I have a content type called article, a content type called page, a content type called card, a content type called event. So I have 4 different content types, and I want only to change the way that the article content type is being presented. So I will have to override the node template. But if I override the general node template, I will override the template for all the content types. I only want to do it for the article content type. So that is where theme suggestion come into play. Drupal will look for the list, and if it finds, let's say, node -- article, it will use that instead. And it will use that only for the article content type. The rest of the content type, they will have something similar, like node -- page, node -- event, node -- car. But because that template doesn't exist, Drupal will fall back to the general one. So that is how you override stuff. And if in doubt, you also get like this particular markup was rendered using this particular template. So you are like absolutely certain of where it came from. So what is the process? Okay, I explained a little bit about theme suggestions already. One thing to note is that there is a book in core where you won't get all the theme suggestions for everything. Pretty much it works really well, but in particular for views, you don't get all the theme suggestions out of the box. So the first link here explains the general concept of how things suggestion work, and it gives example for page, the HTML template, for notes, for forums, for different things. But for views in particular, you can follow the link below, and it will tell you which template naming suggestion you have for views in particular. So the only thing that I can remember is that views is the one that doesn't provide everything. So far, for any other thing, I get the information that I need right away. Uh, Now, how do I override a template? What I need to do, here I see that which template is being used, like the full path to the template. What do I have to do? I go to that folder, I copy the template, and I paste it into my theme. I just paste it into my theme. And within my theme, I can override the markup as I want. Like this is the default node template in Drupal 8, and this is what I needed. So I just start changing stuff, and with this, I know that every time that a node is going to be printed on the page, it will use this specific markup. Again, I am using the node.html.twig. So this is the general node template. If I want to modify a template for a specific content type or for a specific view mode or even for a specific node, I could do that following the theme suggestions. But if I want to override everything, I just need to copy the base one into my theme and make the modifications that I need. Okay, now we're going to the recipes themselves, like things that I have encountered while working, and how do I solve them. First thing, how can I pass information from Drupal to Twig, like from the backend to the frontend? What I do, in your theme folder, you will have a file name, the name of your theme.theme. So that is where your logic is going to reside. That is where your logic is going to live. Again, remember that before I said that if you want to pass a variable from the backend to the frontend, you will have to implement hook preprocess. So if you replace the word hook here for the name of the hook that you want to override, in our case was node, so that is how you do it. I have the example later, but this is how to do it. You modify the theme, that theme file, you implement hook preprocess, you modify the variables arrays. This is a key value array, and the keys will become the variables in the template, and then you print the variable in the template. So the example itself, in this case, my theme is called Butaro. So when you implement a hook, you change the word hook for the name of your theme. So in this case, Butaro, preprocess, and in this case, I am not modifying the node template. I'm modifying the page template. So it says page here. Then I got the variables. The page template out of the box has a variable called node, which contains the node object if we are rendering a node for that specific page. So I check if this page rendering a node, because it can be a view or it can be the result of a form or a module. So I first want to check, am I rendering a form? Yes. And then I am rendering a node of type page. So I can say here, I only want to pass this variable if my node is of type page and not if it is of type article or something else. So I make those checks. After making those checks, then I add to the variables array the information that I want to pass. So I want in Twig a variable called cover_image and a variable called cover_title. And then I just do my logic. In this case, I have the node, I get a field, and I render that field. So this implies some configuration in my backend, but the logic is the same. I implement a hook preprocess function. I do my checks if I want to have the variables available or not. If I do want to have the variables available, I add them to the variables array and assign the value that I want. This can be anything that you want. Once you do that, this is the template itself. So you say, if this is the name of the variable, when I call this, function, I get a render array. So if the variable slash render, that means rendering the array, has some value, that is the same to say if it is not empty, then I want to print this markup. And I print, I will explain this later, but for the title, I print the title and so on. But basically, because I did this, now I have this cover underscore image and cover underscore title variables available in my template. They weren't before, they are now available. So, before going any further, if you have any question, feel free to interrupt me anytime. Okay, so in Drupal 7, we had render arrays. If you want to print something on the page that is a render array, you need to call the render function. In Drupal 8, that is usually not needed. When you print let's say that here, let's imagine that cover underscore title were a render array, and actually it is one. Why do I have to use render here, and why don't I have to use render here? The difference, or the reason is, because when you just print a variable, Drupal will do that automatically for you. Drupal will call the render function automatically for you. So you don't have to do anything else. But this is kind of making a test. And what we have here is either a render array or an object. If we say if object or if array, that will evaluate to true. We don't want to know if it is a valid object or a valid array. We want to know if when that piece of information is rendered, does have any content or not. Because I can have a valid render array or a valid object that when rendered prints nothing. That is possible. So that is why we have to use the render function here. If we are just printing information, Drupal does that automatically. But if I am making a test to see if the variable itself has some content, I have to use the render filter. And actually, there will be an example later where we have to do something else to determine the right test that we want to perform. But that is the reason why you use render. Because if you are not printing, if you're doing a test, you are required to do that. Because a valid either object or array, it can be valid and it will evaluate to true even if it doesn't print anything. Any other question?
Why wouldn't you do that?
If you ever had an instructor who will always tell
in the pre-process. Okay, that is a good question. It is recommended that we never pass HTML directly from here. Why? Because there can be other modules modifying the information that I am passing. So let's say that in addition to this, I have another module that wants to also act on hook preprocess page. And it has a higher weight, so he is called after my thing. And for some reason, he wants to modify the same variable. If I am passing the rendered output, I will have to use regular expression to try to get information from that string. I will have to use parsing that string to say, oh, if it is an image, what is that? Does it has an alt attribute? Does it has a title attribute? So it is not recommended to pass render markup from here because there might be something else trying to act on the same piece of data. So the recommendation is you will pass render arrays or renderable elements to the theme layer, and the theme layer will take care of rendering that for you.
Right, but
Number 3,
the point is,
communicate with everyone.
does it
Clarity goes
exist
a very, very long way.
Or not?
I've had this situation in one of our projects in which
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I could do, for example, is instead of having this as a variable containing the information, I can have a Boolean. Say, do I have a content image, yes or no? But then I will need an extra variable. One to contain the Boolean value, yes or no, and one to contain the actual image itself. So in this case, I only have one variable. I make the test with this, and then I render. But that is totally possible too. Like that depends on the logic that you want to implement. I can have a third value here, a third variable here saying yes or no, is there an image available? I test using that value and that variable, and I don't have to do this. And if that evaluates to true, then the other things happen. So it is possible. The only the recommendation is do not render stuff within the template. The number of values that you want to have inside or the logic that you want to implement, that is up to you. But yeah, that is possible. Any other question with this first example? Okay, let's go to the next one. How can I create and assign classes directly in the Twig template? Before in Drupal 7, it was we had a preprocessed function, and now deprecated. Actually, it doesn't exist, I think, anymore. A process function where we will add variables. We would add classes to be added to the template. In Drupal 8, that is no longer recommended. With Twig in particular, you can create the classes that you need directly in the template. So, how do I do this? In the template itself, I use the set keyword in Twig to define a new variable, and then I use that variable to add the attributes and to add the class. And usually that is done using the attributes, add class, and then the name of your variable. Let's see an example. So let's focus on this part first, where it says set class. So set class equals square brackets. So that means I am going to pass an array. In this case, I only have one value, but in theory, I can have as many as I need. And when I use the attributes add class method, function, it will add all of them. If I have one, it adds one. If I have 10, it adds 10. So what I am doing here, I am concatenating. The tilde is used for concatenation. So flow underscores and then this. Now let me explain what this means. This is kind of nonsense. Actually, I have another slide where I explain this in detail. I will just, for this particular recipe, how do I assign classes to, within the template? I use the set keyword. This is my variable name. I call it class, but you can call it anything that you want. You use square brackets, and then you define as many classes as you need. As you can see, you can use certain logic within the template to determine the name of the class itself, and then you use the attributes add class. So attributes is a variable available in the template. The attributes variable contain the classes that are going to be added to the element itself. So this already has some information. To that information that already exists, I am going to add classes to it based on what I define up here. One thing to take into account, in Drupal we try to be as secure as possible. So there is a filter called clean CSS, and that is used if you for some reason need to use something that was entered by the user as your class name, you will use that filter with a variable, and then it will make sure that you're not being exposed to some malicious behavior. I didn't use it here because the example is for something else, but taking security in mind, there is a clean CSS, clean class filter that you can use for that. And all of that is documented in the links that I provided. So one thing to note, I have this string and I concatenate that to something else. That something else is this here. I will explain later how this is configured, but the left part where it says full with lowercase middle, like the left to the pipe, it's what's being concatenated. So we would say flow underscore middle flow underscore full and so on with the lowercase. I am printing the left part. I will later explain what this whole thing is, which doesn't make much sense, but we have to deal with that. Any question for this particular one? Okay.
Remember,
I will assume if no one asks, I just continue. Interrupt me anytime. How can I render an image as an image field as a background? Uh, for this one, we can try to do it with Twig directly or in a pre-processed function, but it is kind of a headache. So you can just instead use the URL, image URL formatter module. So you install that module, then you configure your image field. I have screenshots for everything. Configure your image field to use the image URL formatter and then render the variable. So how does that work? This I already have the module installed. So when I go to the manage display section of the content type, I go to the field itself and I say, do not render the label, so the label will be hidden. Use the image URL formatter, and that will make sure that we render that URL only. Before explaining anything else, why do we need this module? Out of the box, when we ask Drupal to render an image, it will render the image tag. So image, the source, the title, the alt text, the title, no, the alt text. So if we are trying to print this image as a background, we only need the URL. We don't need the extra markup around that. So that is what the image URL formatter module does. It just gives me the URL. Then I say, give me the full URL. I can have relatives, but we use the full URL. Then what image style do we want to use? And we don't want to link this to nothing. I just want the plain URL to the image using the specific image style there. So I install the module, I configure the display with this specific setting, and then I have to do this. So I am using the image as a background of a section tag. Let's see the line below. Why do I need the spaceless stuff? That is a filter. The spaceless is a filter used to remove any white space before and after the variable. So for some reason in Drupal, and I do not really understand why, when we print variables, we get white space around it. And if it is like HTML in general, it doesn't matter because the browser will make sure to collapse that into nothing or just a single space. But in this particular case, I cannot have spaces or any other crazy stuff there. So with this, I am printing the variable, the image variable that contains only the URL, but that can come with spaces. So with that spaces filter, I remove that. There is another syntax to remove white space, but this works. The other one is less verbose, but for some reason didn't work in that particular case, so I used the spaceless one. One thing that is worth mentioning here, before I said about the theme debug thing, that you can enable theme debug to know about what templates to modify. If you have theme debug enabled and you try to do this, it will break. Why? Because in the end, we are printing a template. This stuff here, content.field horizontal image, that is printing a template. We configure the template to print only the URL itself, but in the end, it's a template. If we have theme debug enabled, it will give me the theme suggestion for that template. So I will have HTML comments and a lot of things that I was not supposed to have. I only wanted the template. So just a word of warning, if you are developing a theme and you have theme debug enabled, you can have unexpected results in cases like this one. But once you turn theme debug to off, which you should do in production, that will work. But that can happen. So in addition to the white spaces that Drupal gives us, if we have theme debug enabled, we have more stuff. And as you can imagine, having HTML comment as an attribute is not valid, so it will break. But that is how you do it. 4, how can I render node content, and by that I mean fields, as HTML attributes? So there are millions of ways to skin a cat. I have never done that, but poor cats. Okay. So I'm going to show some use case that I have run into, but for sure there are many more. So what if I have a file field? So in this particular case, we were using a file field to upload an SVG file and use that SVG file to render an image in my website. So I add to that content type the SVG file, and the configuration in the manage display section. What do? I remove the label and I ask it to print the URL to the file. As simple as that, because it's an SVG, I can put it directly in my template. So I do the same, image, source, and then the source will be the URL of the file. Again, I have to do the spaceless stuff because I can get white spaces. And again, if I have thin debug enabled, I get the comments. So keep that in mind. If you are debugging, the debug information can get in your way when you try to render HTML attributes. Another example for an entity reference field. So in this particular example, we have a content type that has an entity reference to another content type. What we wanted to do is have a link from the first to the second. How do I do that? I add the entity reference field and I configure it this way. I say the label will be hidden, the format will be labeled, and I want to link the label to the entity reference. So again, this will give me a URL which I can use in an href attribute of an A tag. Again, I have to use the spaceless to sort out the spaces problems. But that's how you can use an entity reference field pointing to a different resource and have a link there. This one is a tricky one, and this is where I'm going to explain the thing from the first example. We said before that in a preprocessed function, we can have all the logic that we want to determine if something is going to be printed or not. But let's say that for some reason, we want to give that option to the person who is entering the content as a field, as a Boolean field in the content type itself. So we add a value. In this particular example, the functionality that we're trying to do is we have a checkbox. If the checkbox is marked, then we want to open something in a lightbox. So it's a yes or no. If it is not open, we don't use the lightbox. If it is open, if it is checked, we use the lightbox. So we use a Boolean field, a yes or no field. And this is really important. When we go to manage display, we have to hide the label, as you would imagine, but we have to use the output format 1/0. Why? Because we are making a test, and by default, the Boolean field won't use 1 or 0. By default, it will use the on and off labels that you configure. It happens that when you're doing a test with an if statement, if you have a string, it will evaluate to true. So even if it says do not show the lightbox, that is a valid string, and Twig do not parse the string itself. It's just, okay, this is a valid string, so this will evaluate to true. So even when we don't want to, it will be evaluated to true by mistakenly. So how do we come about with that? For one, we use the 1 or 0 output. Why? Because 1 is evaluated to true, 0 is evaluated to false. You would imagine that is enough. No, that is not enough. You need, again, you have the template. You need to use the render function because we're doing an evaluation. If we're just printing, that wouldn't be needed. But because we're doing an evaluation, we require the render. Then Drupal will, because we need them, of course, add white spaces before and after the 1 and the 0. It so happens that space 0 space is a valid string that will evaluate to true. So using the string filter, we remove the white spaces and we end up only with a 0. And then we can do a real test, if 1 or if 0. That's why we need this. So again, I'm using a Boolean field to determine to show or not to show something, I need to hide the label and configure the 1 and 0. Otherwise, it will use the on and off labels. And I have, to make the date itself, this is the variable, render the variable, and treat the variable to have a 0 or 1, and it will work. So that's how it works in Drupal 8, unfortunately. And again, the recipe itself, how can I conditionally render some content? So now that I have this, I can okay, if this is true, render this content. If that is not true, do not render that content. So I can have some markup within that if statement, and it will only be printed if the test passes, if the test evaluates to true. We're coming to an end mostly. So this is not necessarily Drupal, this is Twig itself. So with Twig, you can have, you can perform a lot of operations. One of them is formatting numbers. So let's say you have a variable called amount value, and you want, it is like in cents, and you want to change those cents to dollars. So what do? You divide by 100, so set dollar equals amount slash 100, and then you print the variable. This $sign at the beginning is not part of the print statement. I'm just saying I want to print $1 before the value. I can have USD or I can have whatever I want. The $sign itself isn't part of the Twig syntax. And I can do more stuff than that. Like I can divide by 11 and then use the number format filter to determine how many decimals do I want to use. And this is a number with an example with numbers, but Twig also I don't have a screenshot for that, but Twig also allows you to format dates. So for example, you can say I want to format my date as year/month/day, or the year in letters dash month dash day, and so on. So I encourage you to look at the Twig documentation. As I said, it's really fast to read, and you will see that Twig out of the box provides a lot of functionality that is really, really useful.
And it's worth mentioning that this particular example is coming from a views rewrite. So like this isn't even in a template. This is just when you're configuring a view and you say rewrite the result, you've got full access to Twig there now, which is pretty awesome.
Okay. So if you don't know Ben, I work with him, and this is something that he pointed out the other day. So like he said, you have Twig available everywhere in Drupal 8, so you can do that in the view rewrite results, which is a good segue to something else. Don't do that. Why you don't? I mean, sometimes you have to get the work done, but if there is a better way to do it a better way. Why you don't want to do this? This is somewhat similar, and by this I mean if you put this code in the rewrite result for a view, that is like having the PHP filter enabled and trying to do PHP logic within your view. Again, we say the whole idea of this stuff is to separate your presentation logic from your business logic. With this, you are again like combining them two. So it is not recommended. If this is the only way to do it, maybe you haven't researched enough. But if there is a deadline and you only have 10 minutes to make it happen, you can provisionally do it this way. Thank you for your time. If there are any questions, I am, yeah? No. Let me make it that clear. It is not that you want to use views in Twig templates. You should use Twig in views templates. But when you go to the views interface, like in your site, when you're trying to configure a view, and let's say it is a view based on fields, you get to choose which fields to present, to render. One thing that you can do is that you can, within the view user interface, you can rewrite the results of the field. So you get in the user interface for Drupal a box where you can put anything Like let's say if you are printing the username, you can rewrite the result to prepend or to append some text around the username directly within the views interface. So in that rewrite results page is that you should not use this stuff. You in the end, like even if you don't know or even if you don't notice, this is that would be the output of the view, and the output of the view will use a template somewhere in the rendering process to spill out to the HTML page. But that is something different. You should use Twig in the views templates. You should not use Twig in the rewrite results option within the view configuration page. Those are two different things. Let me show you.
Like now, you're not supposed to use PHP anywhere in the UI for security reasons, it's kind of the same thing.
Pretty much. So what the problem before is that some things were escaped out of the box and some things were not escaped out of the box. And it was the job of the themer to know if they needed or not to sanitize some content. In Drupal 8, everything is escaped out of the box. So it is secure by default. You still need to be careful when you're trying to output user-entered content, but by default it will try to escape everything. And only like the example that I gave, if you want to use some user-entered content as a CSS class, then you will need to escape that. But if you just print stuff, Drupal will take care of that automatically. But for sure, read the documentation for that. I'm not a security expert. Yeah, absolutely. So in the first slide, this is really bad. You can go to bit.ly /Twig recipes and you can get the slides. So, oh, come on. So there, http bit.ly /Twig dash recipes, and you can have the slides there. And again, if you have any feedback, I will highly appreciate it. Oh, sure.